6 months later, Karen sat in the packed community center, facing an audience of increasingly angry neighbors. The monthly water bills had tripled, and everyone wanted answers. As HOA president, she was expected to have solutions, but the legal documents spread across the table in front of her told a different story. "So let me get this straight," shouted Mike Chen from the back row. "You tried to bully Jim Martinez over a legal well, and now he owns our water supply." Karen's voice was hoarse from explaining the situation repeatedly. The rights were always separate from the property deeds. The original developer just never told anyone. "But you knew Martinez had bought them," called out Sarah Thompson. "You knew this 6 months ago and didn't warn us." Karen's hands clenched into fists. "I thought I could negotiate with him. I thought I could find a way to protect our community." "By doing what?" Mike stood up, his face red with anger. "By sending him more violation notices. By filing lawsuits that got us sanctioned by the county." The room erupted in angry voices. Karen had spent months trying to find legal loopholes, filing appeals, and organizing petition drives. Nothing had worked. Jim's ownership of the water rights was ironclad, and the municipal system had no choice but to pay his rates or find another water source, something that would cost millions and take years to develop. "Quiet," Karen shouted over the crowd. "Quiet, I have a solution." The room gradually settled, though hostile glares remained fixed on her. Karen took a deep breath and looked at the papers before her. "I've been negotiating with Martinez for months. He's agreed to sell the water rights back to the community." A murmur of hope rippled through the crowd. "For how much?" someone called out. Karen swallowed hard. $12 million. The room exploded again. $12 million. Sarah Thompson's voice cut through the chaos. "That's almost $20,000 per household. It's highway robbery." Mike Chen shouted. "He probably bought those rights for a few $100,000. Karen held up her hand. "He bought them for $200,000 at auction, but he's within his legal rights to set the price." "Then we don't pay," someone yelled. "We fight this in court." "We tried that," Karen said quietly. "We lost. Every appeal, every motion, every legal challenge. The law is on his side." The room fell silent as the reality sank in. Finally, Bob Williams, the only remaining original board member, spoke up. "Karen, this is insane. There has to be another way." Karen looked around the room at her neighbors' faces, people she'd lived next to for years, whose property values she'd fought to protect, whose community standards she tried to maintain. Now they were looking at her with a mixture of anger, disappointment, and betrayal. "There is another way," she said softly. "We can all move." The suggestion hit the room like a physical blow. These weren't just houses. They were homes. Families had built their lives here. Children had grown up here. Dreams had been invested in every mortgage payment and renovation project. "Or," Karen continued, her voice growing stronger, "we can accept Martinez's offer. He's agreed to finance the purchase over 10 years with no interest. That's about $200 per month per household. $200 a month for water we already owned," Mike said bitterly. "Water we never actually owned," Karen corrected. "Water we just assumed we owned because no one bothered to read the fine print." As the meeting dissolved into smaller groups of angry discussion, Karen gathered her papers and headed for the door. She paused as she reached the exit and turned back to address the room one final time. "I know you're all angry. I know you blame me for this situation, and maybe you're right to. But I need you to understand something. I never meant for this to happen. I was trying to protect our community, our values, our way of life. Sometimes good intentions aren't enough." Karen walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the sound of voices raised in anger and frustration. As she drove home, she passed Jim Martinez's house. He was sitting on his porch again, but this time he wasn't smiling. He raised his hand in a small wave as she passed. Karen didn't wave back, but she didn't accelerate either. For the first time in months, she found herself wondering what Jim's endgame really was. He'd won, completely and decisively. He'd outmaneuvered the HOA, the municipality, and the entire legal system. But as she pulled into her driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had cost him something too. The next morning, Karen found an envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. The offer expires in 30 days. After that, the price doubles. Choose wisely. JM. Karen stared at the note, her mind racing. 30 days to convince an entire community to pay millions for something they'd once taken for granted. 30 days to salvage what remained of her reputation and leadership. But as she stood in her driveway, watching the sun rise over the perfectly manicured lawns of Meadowbrook Estates, Karen realized that Jim Martinez had taught her something valuable about power. Real power wasn't about rules and regulations and violation notices. Real power was about controlling something people couldn't live without. And that gave her a very dangerous idea. Karen Pritchard stood in her driveway at 6:47 am, clutching a violation notice in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other, watching a crew of workers finish installing what looked suspiciously like a well pump on her neighbor's property. The notice, printed on official Meadowbrook Estates HOA letterhead, cited unauthorized water infrastructure installation and threatened a $500 daily fine until the offensive structure was removed. "Are you kidding me?" she muttered, then marched across the perfectly manicured lawn to where Jim Martinez was directing the workers. "Jim, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Jim looked up from his clipboard, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "Morning, Karen. Just finishing up my water well. Beautiful morning for it, don't you think?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "Your water well. You can't just dig a well without HOA approval. This is a planned community with strict guidelines about." "About what exactly?" Jim interrupted, pulling out his phone. "Because I checked the covenants pretty thoroughly. There's nothing in there about wells. Plenty about fence heights and mailbox colors, but not a word about water rights." Karen's face flushed red. She'd been HOA president for 3 years, and no one had ever challenged her authority so directly. This is ridiculous. We have municipal water for a reason. You can't just go around digging holes wherever you want." "Actually, I can," Jim said, handing her a folder thick with permits. "County approved, state approved, and completely legal. Turns out I own the mineral and water rights to my property. Bought them separately when I moved in 5 years ago." Karen's hands shook as she flipped through the official documents. Everything appeared legitimate, but this felt like a personal attack on her leadership. "We'll see about this," she snapped. "The HOA board will hear about this violation immediately." "What violation?" Jim asked innocently. "I'm following all applicable laws and regulations. The HOA doesn't supersede state and federal water rights." As Karen stormed back to her house, her mind raced. She'd built her reputation on maintaining property values and community standards. If word got out that residents could just ignore HOA oversight, her carefully constructed authority would crumble. She grabbed her phone and started dialing board members. "Emergency meeting tonight," she announced to each voicemail. "We have a situation that threatens the very foundation of our community." By evening, Karen had worked herself into a righteous fury. The emergency board meeting, held in her living room, drew only 3 of the 7 members. She paced before them like a prosecutor presenting her case. "This isn't just about one well," she declared. "This is about precedent. If we allow this, what's next? Chicken coops? Vegetable gardens in front yards? The complete breakdown of everything we've worked to build." Board member Sandra Chen raised her hand tentatively. "But Karen, if he has the legal right?" "Legal right doesn't mean it's right for our community." Karen slammed her hand on the coffee table. "We have standards here. We have expectations. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let some contractor think he can waltz in here and turn our neighborhood into some kind of rural commune." The room fell silent. Finally, Treasurer Bob Williams cleared his throat. "So what exactly are you proposing we do?" Karen's eyes gleamed with determination. "We fight this. We find a way to make this so expensive and so difficult that he'll give up and cap that well himself. Nobody challenges the Meadowbrook Estates HOA on my watch." 3 weeks later, Karen stood in the county courthouse, her lawyer's briefcase in one hand and a stack of freshly printed legal documents in the other. The injunction hearing hadn't gone as planned. Judge Patterson had not only denied their request to force Jim to cap his well, but had also ordered the HOA to cease all harassment and intimidation tactics. "Mrs. Pritchard," Judge Patterson had said, peering over his glasses, "your organization has issued 17 separate violation notices for the same legally compliant well installation. This constitutes harassment, and I'm warning you that continued frivolous legal action will result in sanctions." Karen's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she replayed the hearing in her mind. The other HOA board members had grown increasingly distant over the past month. 3 had resigned, citing philosophical differences with her leadership style. Even Sandra Chen, her closest ally, had stopped returning her calls. But Karen had discovered something interesting during her research. Jim's well wasn't just any well. It was tapping into an underground aquifer that supplied water to the entire development. The same aquifer that fed the municipal system serving all of Meadowbrook Estates. She pulled into her driveway and noticed Jim watering his garden with a hose connected to his new well pump. The sight made her blood boil. While everyone else paid increasing municipal water bills, Jim was getting free water from the same source. "That's theft," she muttered, then paused. A dangerous idea began forming in her mind. That evening, Karen called her lawyer. "Marcus, I need to ask you something hypothetical. If someone owned water rights to an aquifer, could they charge people for using that water?" Marcus Weinstein's voice was cautious. "Karen, what exactly are you thinking? Just answer the question." "Well, theoretically, if someone owned the rights to a water source, they could control access to it. But Karen, this sounds like..." "Thank you, Marcus. That's all I needed to know." Karen hung up and immediately began researching water rights law. She discovered that the original developer of Meadowbrook Estates had retained the water rights to the entire property, then sold them to a shell company in 2018. The shell company had gone bankrupt, and the rights had been auctioned off. A quick search of public records revealed the buyer, Meadowwater ALC, a company that existed only on paper. Karen's pulse quickened as she dug deeper. Meadowwater ALC was owned by another company, which was owned by another company, which was ultimately owned by someone named Jim Martins. Karen's laptop screen illuminated her face in the darkness as the full scope of Jim's plan became clear. He hadn't just bought water rights to his own property. He bought the rights to the entire aquifer. Every drop of water flowing to every house in Meadowbrook Estates was legally his. The next morning, Karen drove to Jim's house and found him sitting on his porch, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He looked up as she approached, that same infuriating smile on his face. "Morning, Karen. How's the HOA business?" "Cut the act, Jim. I know what you did." Jim folded his newspaper carefully. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Meadowwater ALC, the aquifer rights. You bought them all, didn't you?" Jim's smile widened. "That's some impressive detective work. I wondered when you'd figure it out." Karen's voice trembled with rage. "You manipulated us. You knew we tried to stop your well, and you used that as cover while you bought the rights to our entire water supply." "I didn't manipulate anyone," Jim said calmly. "I just paid attention to details that everyone else ignored. The developer was sloppy, the municipality was lazy, and the HOA was too busy micromanaging mailbox colors to notice who actually owned the water flowing under their feet." "What do you want?" Karen asked. Jim stood up, towering over her. "I want you to stop harassing me. I want you to stop sending violation notices for legal activities. And I want you to start treating your neighbors with respect instead of like subjects in your little kingdom. And if I don't..." Jim's expression grew serious. "Then I'll do what any reasonable business owner would do. I'll start charging market rates for my water." Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "You can't be serious. The municipal contract with the county expires next month. Guess who they'll need to negotiate with for renewal?" As Karen walked back to her house, she realized she was no longer fighting about a well or HOA authority. She was fighting for the survival of her entire community. And for the first time in 3 years as HOA president, she wasn't sure she could win.